So the wave height initially might only be a couple of meters, but it might be 200 kilometers long. And it heads out at the deep water wave speed, which is very fast. So it's jetliner speed, 500 or 600 miles an hour.
If you wanted to ship cargo from Sydney to Chile, you would think a straight line is the way to go, but you would be wrong. Every single day, ships carrying millions of dollars in goods purposely ignore the shortest route across the South Pacific. They choose to face bottlenecks and long delays elsewhere, rather than crossing this open water. This is not some modern superstition or a simple weather delay. It is a battle against a giant wave factory that never turns off. And get this, the crazy part is that being lost here means nobody is coming to save you. The Endless Storm Factory. Right now, I am going to show you something that looks like a glitch. Take a look. This is a real-time map of ship traffic worldwide. The North Pacific is packed. Asia, the Americas, Europe. Tons of dots. And every one of those dots is a ship carrying something important. But there is something weird. Let's drop a little farther south. Right here, this is the South Pacific. And it is empty. Now, look closer. Sure, you can spot a couple of ships. There they are. But we are talking about a huge chunk of the planet. Open ocean, relatively short routes, and almost no ships. That sounds ridiculous. Just look. Here is South America, and we need to ship cargo from here to Australia or New Zealand. How do we do it? Well, just draw a straight line. That's the shortest route. See any straits or bottlenecks along the way? Me neither. It looks like the perfect route, but in real life you can cross that line out immediately. Why? Sailors call this area a true hellscape of weather. The wind never stops there. And what does wind on the open ocean mean? One thing, waves. Massive. Hold on. That raises a question. Modern ships are steel beasts. Huge, stable, loaded with technology. They should be able to handle it. So why does this patch of ocean look like a black hole for shipping? Why do even the toughest crews, the ones used to the harshest seas, avoid it? You're about to find out. So here's a place where ships don't want to sail. But have people always feared it? Or is that a modern superstition? Let's jump back to the 17th and 18th centuries when explorers wrote reports about their voyages. In those logs, you'll find lines like endless storms and the ocean's constant roar. There are simply no laws here. What were they talking about? Yep, the Southern Pacific. Even back then, sailors knew it is better to steer clear of that region. And only centuries later did it become clear they weren't exaggerating. They just didn't understand the physics behind it. And that's what I'm about to explain. There's a term for it, the Roaring Forties. It is a belt between 40 and 50 degrees south latitude. Calm seas are rare there. Westerly winds circle the entire planet in a continuous loop. And along the way, there's almost no land to slow them down. No mountains, no continental barriers, just open water and acceleration. So what does that lead to? The wind here isn't an event. It is the default setting. Typical speeds sit at around 35 to 56 miles per hour, and gale force blasts can easily push past 67 miles per hour. And the key thing is, this isn't a quick squall that shows up and disappears. It is a mode the sea can live in for weeks. But wind alone still isn't the main problem. The real problem is the waves. The Southern Ocean runs like a giant wave factory with no off switch. Wind drives water for hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles, and each new wave is born on a surface that's already accelerating. In the roughest winter zones, average wave heights climb above 16 feet, and individual crests can top 33 feet. But wait, can't modern ships handle that? They can. The issue is something else. The danger isn't just how tall the waves are, it is their rhythm. The ocean doesn't hit once and let go. A ship gets trapped in non-stop motion with no brakes, rising and then dropping, rolling and then recovering, again and again. It is not that simple, though, because the physical violence of the water is only the first layer of the mystery. The loneliest spot on the planet. If someone on board suffers a major injury, a heart attack, or severe poisoning, You don't just pull into the nearest port. In the southern Pacific, you can be surrounded by thousands of miles of open water. A helicopter may have nowhere to reach from. Rescue vessels are simply too far away, and the weather often makes evacuation impossible. At that point, the ocean stops being a difficult route. It becomes isolation, pure and simple. And that's still not the whole list of problems. Let's step away from the ocean for a moment and look up into space. Every satellite, every orbital station, has a limited service life. And when that life ends, the hardware isn't left drifting around forever. It is deliberately deorbited so it re-enters the atmosphere, burns up, and whatever survives falls somewhere it won't hurt anyone. And that's where things get really interesting. The crash site isn't chosen as somewhere over the ocean. It is calculated so that there's basically nothing nearby. No cities, no ports, no busy shipping lanes. And again, those calculations point to the same spot on the map. This is Point Nemo. It is so far from civilization that the nearest bits of land look more like random specks than real places. See for yourself. Tiny, uninhabited islands sit about 1,670 miles away, farther apart than many countries are from each other. And if we talk about actual civilization, the numbers get even wilder. Easter Island, the closest permanently inhabited place, is more than 1,860 miles away. So you get it, right? Even the International Space Station, orbiting roughly 250 miles above Earth, is closer. And really, a huge stretch of the South Pacific is a world where land is a day away or more. No harbors, no Coast Guard nearby, no dense traffic. It is like a house in a vast open field, totally isolated, with no neighbors. And that kind of isolation has consequences. September 2002, a small racing yacht, Excalibur, is heading back toward Australia after a regatta. Just a routine passage. Nothing dramatic expected. Then the keel snaps. To put it plainly, the keel is the heaviest part under the water, the thing that keeps a yacht standing up. Without it, the boat loses stability and capsizes almost immediately. The predictable result? The crew is thrown into the ocean, and out there it is wind, waves, and open sea. The nearest port might be only tens of miles away, but during a storm, that distance might as well be another planet. Their distress signal was received, but then reality set in. The part people rarely think about: weather and distance. Helicopters couldn't take off. Conditions wouldn't allow it. There were no ships close enough to reach them quickly. The people drifted while the ocean followed its own rules, not the rescuer's schedule. Yeah, about that. The danger of being alone is actually combined with a complete lack of financial incentive. The ocean without any life. There is one final reason why ships, ranging from massive container vessels to humble fishing trawlers, conspicuously avoid this specific patch of the South Pacific. It is a reason that governs almost every human endeavor on this planet, and it comes down to a cold, hard calculation of profit and loss. To the uninitiated, sailing these waters might seem like a logical shortcut, a way to shave days off a transoceanic journey. But in the modern world, the shortest distance between 2 points is rarely a straight line. It is a line that makes financial sense. To understand the peculiar emptiness of this region, we have to look at the world the way a logistics algorithm does. If you examine a heat map of global shipping lanes, you'll notice something striking. The oceans are not a chaotic web of paths. Instead, they look like a series of high-speed interstates. Traffic funnels into a handful of remarkably dense corridors, primarily connecting the industrial hubs of East Asia, the consumer markets of North America, and the historical trade centers of Europe. Why do ships stick to these crowded tracks? You would think that with the vastness of the Pacific at their disposal, captains would seek out the quiet, shorter routes. But the economics of the 21st century have largely abandoned the romantic notion of point-to-point sailing. In the era of mega-vessels, ships capable of carrying over 20,000 containers, the industry has moved toward a hub-and-spoke model. In this system, cargo isn't sent directly from a small port in South America to a small port in Southeast Asia. Instead, Goods are consolidated at massive high-tech hubs like Singapore, Shanghai, or Rotterdam. Here, cargo is sorted, shifted onto different vessels, and then distributed across the network. This centralization allows for massive economies of scale. It is cheaper to run one giant ship along a main street than it is to run 10 smaller ships on diverse, direct routes. This brings us to the South Pacific's infrastructure problem. To make a route through this region viable, you would need a nodal hub, a midway point where ships could refuel, exchange cargo, or seek repairs. But in this vast stretch of water, there is nothing. There are no deep water ports, no automated gantry cranes, and no refueling stations. Without these intermediate points, the risk of a trans-Pacific crossing through the Deep South increases exponentially. If a ship suffers a mechanical failure or a medical emergency here, they are thousands of miles from help. In the eyes of a shipping company, the South Pacific isn't a shortcut. It's a logistical dead zone that offers no safety net and no opportunity for intermediate trade. But what about those 2 ships we spotted on the horizon? If they aren't carrying iPhones or car parts, they must be after the ocean's natural wealth. After all, the Pacific is often described as the world's pantry. The North Pacific is a titanic seafood factory where industrial fleets harvest millions of tons of fish every year. The Central Pacific, despite its warmth, is the historic heart of the global tuna trade. However, as you move into the South Pacific Gyre, the activity vanishes. To understand why, we have to look beneath the surface at the biological machinery of the ocean. Most people assume the ocean is a uniform soup of life, but it is actually more like a mosaic of lush rainforests and barren deserts. Life in the ocean depends on a process called upwelling. In productive regions, cold, nutrient-rich water from the deep is pushed toward the surface. This deep water carries the fertilizer of the sea, nitrates, phosphates, and silicates that have settled on the floor over centuries. When these nutrients hit the sunlight-drenched surface, they trigger a bloom of phytoplankton, the microscopic plants that form the base of the entire marine food web. Where there is upwelling, there is plankton. Where there is plankton, there are fish. And where there are fish, there are fishing boats. The South Pacific, however, is the site of a permanent biological padlock. Because of the way Earth rotates and the way the winds blow, this region is home to a massive, rotating current known as a gyre. This gyre acts like a giant slow-motion whirlpool that traps water in place. More importantly, the South Pacific is characterized by extreme stratification. Because the sun beats down on these still waters, the top layer stays very warm and, consequently, very light. This warm blanket sits heavily on top of the cold, dense water below. In most parts of the ocean, the wind or currents can mix these layers, but here, the layers stay separated. The result is a biological tragedy. The nutrients remain trapped in the dark depths where there isn't enough light for plants to grow. Meanwhile, the surface water, where the sunlight is abundant, is completely depleted of the minerals needed to sustain life. It is a paradox. The water here is some of the clearest, most beautiful sapphire blue water on the planet. But it is clear precisely because it is empty. There is no plankton to cloud the water, no marine snow of organic debris, and therefore nothing for the fish to eat. If you are a commercial fisherman, fuel is your biggest expense. You don't spend it sailing into a desert. You go where the upwelling is, off the coast of Peru or in the turbulent North Atlantic. Consequently, the South Pacific remains one of the few places on Earth where human presence is an anomaly rather than a constant. This total isolation, born from a combination of logistical emptiness and biological poverty, has given the region one final, grim utility. Because it is the point on Earth furthest from any human civilization, and because there is no economic or ecological skin in the game, it has become the world's spacecraft cemetery. When a space agency needs to deorbit a massive structure, like the Mir space station, or, eventually, the International Space Station, they aim for Point Nemo in the heart of this region. They choose it because they know that even if the debris spreads over hundreds of miles, it is almost certain to hit nothing. There are no shipping lanes to disrupt, no fishing grounds to contaminate, and no ecosystems to ruin. For the modern world, the South Pacific serves as the ultimate away. It is the place we send the things we want to forget, protected by a barrier of bad economics and sterile water. It is a reminder that even in our interconnected age, there are still places where the map remains effectively blank. Not because we haven't found them, but because we have no reason to be there. But here's the catch. There is a passage nearby that is even more terrifying, yet it sees thousands of ships. The deadly shortcut we actually use. Take a look at the map. This is the Drake Passage. It looks like an ordinary gap between two continents, but by some estimates, around 800 ships have been lost here over the past few centuries. And that's only a rough figure. Those are just the wrecks that we recorded. How many actually went down is anyone's guess. Verifying it today would be difficult, and here's why. Remember the Roaring Forties I mentioned? This is where that phenomenon hits peak intensity. Average wind speeds in this area often sit at 34 to 45 miles per hour. Not during a storm, but as the baseline. In major gales, gusts can easily climb past 56 to 67 miles per hour. And that's not even the worst part. The waves are even more brutal. In fairly normal conditions, wave heights run 10 to 16 feet. And that's considered manageable. During storms, seas build to 26 to 33 feet, and sometimes 39 to 49 feet. To put that in perspective, you're looking at the height of a 3 to 5 story building. Except that building is moving constantly, slamming into the ship. And there's one more interesting twist. It is not just the wave height that matters, it is their shape. Here the waves are short, steep, and stacked on top of each other. The ship simply can't sync up with the sea's rhythm. It gets slammed upward, twisted sideways, and washed over all at once. Sounds like a perfect recipe for shipwrecks, but that's only the beginning. Antarctica is close by, and it has a huge impact on this strait. The water is so icy that a person who goes overboard loses strength within minutes. Even if the vessel survives, rescuing the crew becomes a race against time. And don't forget about icebergs. And not just icebergs. This place has the full sailor's nightmare kit, fog, a lack of reliable charts, and poor communications. So any damage, a snapped mast or loss of steering, can go from a problem to a terrible end fast. What about modern ships? They're supposed to handle all this. Well, look, about 15,000 vessels pass through here every year. So, in theory, things should be working, and technology has come a long way. Ships don't navigate by gut feeling or outdated, inaccurate maps anymore. You can call for a rescue, use satellite navigation, and so on. Sure, we're long past the era of wooden sailing ships. Today, you've got advanced vessels built from steel, composites, and other durable materials, but you don't seriously think that makes the Drake Passage totally safe, do you? For example, in March 2001, the small expedition ship National Geographic Endeavour was knocked off course by a massive wave about 98 feet high. The bridge windows were smashed, and the crew lost navigation and communications. Still, the ship managed to reach port a few days later with the help of a tug. And here's a much more recent case. In 2025, 39-foot waves slammed into a cruise ship, and several passengers were injured due to the violent rolling. In short, the Drake Passage remains extremely dangerous. So that raises the question, why did tens of thousands of ships pass through this perilous stretch every year? Adventure seekers are easy to explain. They're literally chasing the thrill. Cruise ships are easy too. Tourists often want to visit places that aren't exactly ordinary. Cargo ships also pass through the Drake Passage. And for them, the priority is simple: get from point A to point B without drama. And at the same time, these ships have a much safer alternative to move between the Atlantic and the Pacific, or vice versa, the Panama Canal. What are they doing in the Drake Passage? The catch is that the Panama Canal is safer, but it is not perfect. Not every ship can fit. The locks are about 1,001 feet long and 161 feet wide, with a maximum allowed draft of roughly 49 feet. For supertankers and the very largest container ships, that's just not enough. They physically can't squeeze through. And even if a ship does fit, that doesn't mean it can sail straight in. The canal runs on a tight schedule, You wait your turn, enter the locks down to the minute, and depend on the entire system running smoothly. Any hiccup, and the vessel is stuck. At this scale, stuck doesn't mean hours. It can mean days and hundreds of thousands of dollars lost to downtime. Sure, plenty of very large ships still use Panama, sometimes with reduced load. So why hasn't traffic through the Drake Passage disappeared? Because Panama has other major drawbacks. The Panama Canal depends directly on fresh water. Its locks are filled from reservoirs, and in recent years that water has been running short more and more often, especially during the dry season. When that happens, the canal has to cut capacity, impose restrictions, or delay ships for a day or longer, simply because water levels aren't high enough for safe passage. Here's a clear example. In 2023, during Panama's most severe drought in decades, authorities reduced daily transits from the usual 38 to 40 ships to roughly 22 to 24. And the worst part is, it didn't end there. Restrictions stayed in place throughout 2023 and into part of 2024. What does that mean for shipping companies? It is basically a nightmare scenario. Schedules collapse, supply chains snap, losses pile up, and suddenly even the most dangerous route starts to look like a workable alternative. That's when the Drake Passage comes back into the conversation. Brutal, risky, but predictable in one way. Once you're out in the open ocean, you keep moving. No waiting, no stops. So here's the deal. If the south is too dangerous, there might be a new path opening in the north. The future of the frozen north. First, a quick historical note. In 1845, British Admiral Sir John Franklin set out on an expedition aboard the Erebus and Terror. In the end, every member of the crew, 129 men, perished. It remains one of the greatest tragedies in the history of seafaring. What's most astonishing is that the ships were found only about 170 years later. Then, in 1850, the ship investigator went to the same region to search for Franklin's expedition and ended up trapped as well. It too was discovered many years later. So where is this marine black hole? All these events took place in Canada's Northwest Passage, long seen as a potential route between the Atlantic and the Pacific. But as you can tell, it is incredibly dangerous. What's really going on up there? The first and most obvious obstacle is the ice. In the straits and around the islands, it can be wildly unpredictable. Even in summer, when parts of the Arctic finally loosen their grip, huge slabs of ice keep drifting through, forming impassable choke points where ships can end up trapped for weeks. Honestly, that alone would be reason enough to choose a different route. But that's not the whole story. Let's look at the map. The Northwest Passage is a maze of narrow, twisting channels. If the Drake Passage and the Panama Canal are more or less a straight shot, this one requires constant maneuvering and with near-perfect precision. One wrong move and the ship runs aground or cracks its hull. In a place this cold and empty, that's almost a guaranteed disaster. So why weren't stranded ships rescued here in the past? Simple. There's nothing to support it. No emergency ports, no refueling stations, no repair services, and there are no rescue vessels anywhere within hundreds of miles. In other words, any accident turns into a long, brutal fight to survive. And finally, the Northwest Passage is brutal weather in its purest form. Gale force winds, blizzards, fog, and sudden temperature swings. Even seasoned crews can get trapped, and forecasts up here are almost useless. And if the route is that dangerous, why is it still being pitched as an alternative to the Panama Canal? You'd think this is where technology saves the day. Satellites can track ships with feet-level accuracy. Weather updates arrive almost in real time, and modern ice-capable vessels can operate in places where ships used to turn back. In theory, all of that should make navigating the icy maze noticeably safer. The danger doesn't disappear, but it feels more managed. Fewer surprises, more calculation. Does it actually work that way? Not really. In 2023, 42 ships transited the Northwest Passage. In 2024, only 18 did. That's nowhere near the volumes of the main alternatives, because the truth is the passage remains hazardous no matter how well you prepare. Here's a telling example. In 2010, the cruise ship Clipper Adventurer took tourists through the Northwest Passage. The vessel was outfitted for Arctic conditions with a reinforced hull and an experienced crew. But it wasn't enough. In the Simpson Strait, the ship struck a submerged shoal and came to a stop. After that, there was only waiting and the evacuation of passengers. 8 years later, history repeated itself. In 2018, the research vessel Academic Iofe, with 163 people aboard, ran aground in one of the Arctic Straits. Things escalated fast. Passengers were transferred to another ship, fuel leaked into the sea, and the expedition was essentially derailed. And this wasn't a tourist cruise liner, it was a scientific vessel with a trained crew and specialized equipment. That's why it feels paradoxical. On paper, there's an alternative. But in practice, it is like there isn't. And if we pretend the Northwest Passage doesn't exist and keep sending ships through the Panama Canal or the stormy Drake Passage, that's not a real option. Because the northern route is already starting to change. If the ice melts and the south stays empty, will we eventually just move all our trade to the north? Leave a comment below with your thoughts and subscribe for more.